Welcome to le podcast de Philippe. Today we're going to dive deep. On fait le point sur l'actualité des 5 derniers jours avec Trump.
Musk.
And all this opposition that's rising up from citizens in both the U.S. and Canada.
Okay.
We're going to be pulling from a bunch of different sources, AP News, The Guardian, Politico. So we're going to look at Trump's proposals. Like, what are they and how's everyone reacting to them? And then we got to talk about Elon Musk and like his whole deal with the US Treasury.
Yeah.
All this stuff is really changing how we think about, the relationship between governments and citizens in the private sector. It's a lot.
Yeah. No, it's a lot to unpack. But Trump's proposals, especially those about sending criminals to El Salvador and the U.S. just taking control of Gaza, those have definitely gotten people talking.
For sure.
And, the thing is, these ideas, while they seem radical, they actually do kind of fit with, his past actions and what he said before.
It's almost like he's always, pushing the limits, like testing the boundaries.
Yeah.
So this whole El Salvador prison thing, he's actually thinking about sending U.S. citizens who are convicted of crimes
Yeah.
to El Salvadorian prisons
Yeah.
to serve their sentences.
That's what it sounds like. Secretary of State Rubio said El Salvador offered.
Ah.
And Trump seemed interested.
Wow.
Deporting U.S. citizens is
Right.
against the Constitution.
Right.
And then there's just the whole issue of the conditions in those prisons. They're notoriously harsh. So it raises some serious ethical and legal questions.
Yeah, for sure. It just seems unbelievable. Then there's this whole thing about him wanting to take over Gaza.
Yeah.
And maybe even relocate the Palestinians. What would that even look like? What would that do to the region?
It's definitely drawn a lot of criticism, both from people in the U.S. and internationally. Allies like Saudi Arabia and Egypt have flat out rejected the idea, and Hamas officials have condemned it.
Right.
And even here in the U.S., some politicians have called it, just flat out dangerous. So it just goes to show how much instability something like that could cause.
Wow. So we've got all this opposition to Trump, especially in the U.S. and Canada. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, how are those two countries responding differently?
Okay, so in the U.S., we're seeing like a more subtle kind of resistance.
Okay.
You've got Democratic state attorneys general challenging things legally.
Right.
And you've got states passing laws that go against federal policies.
Interesting.
And even Democratic governors are pushing back,
Right.
especially on immigration.
So it's more of a strategic and institutional kind of opposition.
But simply, whether it'll actually be effective, that's still up for debate.
I see.
The Republicans control a lot of the government, and there's so much political polarization, it's hard to get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about everyday citizens, though? Are they speaking out at all?
Oh, absolutely. There have been huge protests in Washington, D.C., and there are more planned across the country, using hashtags like #BuildResistance and #50cyber1. So yeah, citizen-led opposition is a big part of the response to Trump.
Okay, so now, let's talk about Canada. You said they're being more outspoken. What exactly are they doing?
Well, it seems like it's a combination of things, like Trump's trade threats and him talking about Canada becoming like the 51st state.
Right.
Canadians are straight up boycotting U.S. products.
Wow.
Canceling subscriptions, even avoiding American fast food chains.
They play.
And social media campaigns like #BoycottBDUSA are getting a lot of attention.
So it's interesting how the opposition in each country is so different.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it could be a few things. Maybe it's just a cultural difference, in how they approach disagreement. But also, Canada's economy is way more tied to the U.S.
Right.
So they feel the impact of Trump's policies more directly.
That makes sense.
And then when you add in the things he's done specifically targeting Canada, it's no surprise that their reaction is stronger.
Yeah, I could see that. So we've got Trump dealing with all these controversial proposals and the opposition to them. Now let's switch gears and talk about Elon Musk and what's going on with the US Treasury.
Okay, this is where things get a little weird. Elon Musk, as director of the Department of Government Efficiency, they call it DOGE, he's been given access to the U.S. federal payment system.
Wait, so the guy behind Tesla and SpaceX has access to the system that handles Social Security, tax refunds, all that. That seems risky. What exactly does he have access to?
According to the Treasury Department, it's just read only.
Okay.
He can look, but he can't touch. No changing anything, no interrupting payments.
But even so, people are worried about security.
Well, absolutely. They're worried about data breaches.
Yeah.
And him having too much influence over federal finances.
Yeah.
It's sparked protests outside the Treasury Department. People are demanding transparency, accountability.
What's the Treasury doing about all this?
Well, they're trying to calm everyone down, saying
Right.
that everything's run by career staff and that they follow strict security and privacy rules, but people are still skeptical.
I bet.
Some experts say even read-only access could be dangerous, especially if there are any weaknesses in the system.
Right. So this has really started a debate
Uh,
about the role of private individuals in government.
it has. This whole thing about the public and private sectors mixing, it brings up a lot of questions about accountability, transparency, and conflicts of interest, especially when you're dealing with systems as sensitive as this.
Right. So while the Treasury is trying to reassure everyone, this whole incident is forcing us to think about the changing roles and responsibilities of individuals and institutions in our society.
It is. And it's a conversation we need to have.
Definitely.
We have to figure out how to balance things, how to use outside expertise without compromising the integrity of our government.
It's a tough one.
It is. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge we have to face head on,
Right.
especially as the world gets more and more complex.
Absolutely.
We can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening.
You're right.
We need to be proactive. We need to have open and honest conversations, and we need to find solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah. It's all about finding that balance and making sure that the people's interests are always at the forefront.
That's the key.
Absolutely.
That's what it all boils down to.
All right. Well, this has been a really insightful conversation so far. I'm really glad we're able to dive into all of this.
You too.
I think it's important for people to understand what's going on
Definitely.
and to start thinking about these bigger questions.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
You're welcome.
It's been really valuable.
I'm glad I could help.
And for our listeners, stay tuned. We're going to keep exploring all of this in more depth in the next part of our deep dive.
It's good.
So don't go anywhere.
Okay. You know, this whole thing with Musk, it kind of brings up a bigger trend. It's not just about this administration. We saw this blurring of lines between public and private, even with the last few presidents, but it feels like it's getting worse now.
What do you think is causing that?
It's tough to say for sure. I think part of it is that the government is just so complicated these days. The problems are so complex that they need experts from outside the government to help them figure things out.
I can see that. Like with cybersecurity?
Yeah.
Or AI. Even pandemics. You need specialists.
Yeah.
It's not something the government can always handle on their own.
Exactly. And then you've got this revolving door between the government and the private sector.
Right.
People go back and forth.
That's
They bring their experience, their connections.
So it's kind of like a cross-pollination of ideas and experience.
Yeah.
But doesn't that also raise concerns about conflicts of interest?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's where the accountability and transparency come in. When you've got private individuals making decisions in the government, you got to have safeguards to make sure they're not just looking out for themselves or their companies, but for the public good.
But we got to find a balance
Yeah.
between using outside expertise and protecting the integrity of the government.
Exactly. It's an ongoing debate, and it'll probably only get more complicated as we move forward.
I agree.
But we can't forget about all the other stuff Trump has done. Beyond those big proposals, he's made other decisions that have people talking.
Really? Like what?
Well, he froze international aid for 90 days, except for some humanitarian stuff.
Wow.
A lot of aid organizations are furious. They say it'll hurt millions of people.
That's a big change from how the U.S. usually handles foreign policy.
It is. And he pulled the U.S. out of the UN Human Rights Council. A lot of people see that as a sign that the U.S. is turning its back on human rights.
Wow.
It's definitely alienated some allies and made people question the U.S.'s commitment to human rights.
That sends a pretty clear message.
It does.
What about domestic policy? Anything interesting happening there?
He signed an executive order that restricts healthcare access for transgender people, especially transgender youth.
Oh, wow.
LGBTQ plus advocates are outraged. They see it as discrimination against a vulnerable group.
So Trump is definitely making waves, both at home and abroad.
He is.
Is there a connection between all these actions?
You know, it's interesting. All these different actions, they kind of point to a theme. He's challenging the way things have always been done, whether it's pulling back from international commitments or imposing tariffs or making controversial domestic policies. He's constantly shaking things up.
So is he doing this on purpose? Is it a strategy?
It's hard to say. Some people think he has a plan, even if it's different from what we're used to. Others think he's just acting on instinct, trying to show everyone how strong he is.
Wow. It's definitely an interesting time in politics.
It is.
A little unsettling, too.
Yeah.
We talked about the opposition to Trump before. Do you think it's getting stronger now?
It's still early, but we're seeing a lot of activism online, and people are calling for protests, especially after that executive order on transgender healthcare.
Okay.
So yeah, it looks like the opposition is mobilizing.
I guess we'll have to see how it all plays out.
We will.
So let's go back to Elon Musk and the US Treasury.
Okay.
You were talking about conflicts of interest and how to make sure things are transparent.
Yeah.
This whole situation with Musk.
It raises a lot of questions about how we handle those conflicts and how we ensure accountability.
Right.
One of the biggest concerns is the lack of transparency around Musk's role in DOGE and his access to the payment system.
So what can we do about that?
Well, maybe we need to require people like Musk to disclose any potential conflicts of interest before they take on these roles.
That makes sense.
And there could be more oversight from Congress or independent agencies to make sure they're doing the right thing,
Okay.
to make sure they're acting in the public interest.
It sounds like we need to find that sweet spot
We do.
between using private sector knowledge
Yeah.
and protecting the government.
It's a tough balance to strike,
It is.
but it's essential.
Absolutely.
We can't just ignore this issue.
Right.
It's not going to go away on its own.
You're right.
We have to face it head on
I agree.
and figure out how to move forward.
In a way that protects everyone. It really makes you think about, how we define public service in this day and age and what we're doing to make sure everyone's accountable. But I want to go back to something you said earlier about Trump kind of shaking things up, challenging the way things are usually done. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. When it comes to international stuff, he's definitely weakened some of our alliances.
Okay.
He's pulled out of important agreements like
Yeah.
the Paris Climate Accord,
Right.
and he just doesn't seem to care much for diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
All of that's hurt America's reputation in the world, and it's created an opening for countries like China and Russia to step in.
So he's basically giving up America's leadership role.
A lot of experts are worried about that.
I can see why.
And then domestically, he's gone after the free press.
Okay.
He's tried to undermine the courts.
What?
And he's even ignored the rule of law
Wow.
when it suits him. All of that erodes trust in our institutions and makes the political divide even worse.
It sounds like he's
Okay.
damaging the very core of American democracy.
Some people would say that, and they wouldn't be wrong. His actions are definitely worrying, especially for people who care about democracy. So
What can we do?
it's a tough question.
Where do we even start?
Well, I think the first step is awareness. We have to recognize the danger.
Right.
And we have to remember how important it is to protect our freedoms.
We can't just assume they'll always be there.
Exactly.
We have to be active. We have to hold our leaders accountable, no matter what party they belong to.
That's right.
Well, this deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've talked about Trump's proposals, the pushback he's facing, the consequences of his actions, and even Elon Musk's involvement with the US Treasury.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But I think it's important to have these conversations. So for our listeners, I want to leave you with this. In a world where the lines between government, the private sector, and everyday people are getting blurrier, how can we make sure power is used responsibly and that the people's voices are heard?
That's the question we all need to be asking.
That's a good place to end it. This has been Le Podcast de Philippe. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and like our video. We'll see you next time.